The bold declaration. The Galactic Council had always believed that peace was the only way to maintain order in the vastness of the galaxy. For centuries, they ruled with an iron fist, enforcing treaties and agreements that united different species under a common goal. But not everyone in the Council agreed with this vision. There were always those who thought humanity was a threat, a species too unpredictable, too dangerous. And on this day, the Council's patience finally ran out. It all began with a sudden announcement, echoing across every communication channel in the galaxy. The cold, detached voice rang out, sending a chill down the spines of millions. The Galactic Council has officially declared war on humanity. The words seemed impossible. Humanity, the same species that had once been considered primitive, barely out of its planetary cradle, was now a target of one of the most powerful organizations in the galaxy. The declaration was shocking, unexpected, even. The Council had always prided itself on diplomacy, on peaceful negotiations, and yet now they were calling for war. The reason for this bold declaration wasn't immediately clear. Humanity had never provoked the Council in any significant way. But rumors had been circulating for years. Some said that humans were becoming too advanced too quickly, that their rapid development of technology and weapons made them a growing threat. Others whispered that there was something more, a deep-seated fear of humanity's ability to unite and fight back when cornered. Sarah Kingston, a decorated officer in the Earth's military, was standing on the bridge of her ship when the news came through. The sleek, silver vessel known as the Ark Horizon was part of Earth's growing fleet, a fleet that had been quietly expanding in recent years, its purpose still unclear to the rest of the galaxy. She knew this was a turning point. The Council had crossed a line. Sarah stared at the holographic display in front of her, watching the galaxy map flicker. She had seen this coming. She knew something had been brewing beneath the surface, but hearing the words out loud made it real. The Council had just made a grave mistake. A soft beep interrupted her thoughts, and she looked down to see a message from Earth Command. The orders were simple: prepare for war. She knew the human fleet was outmatched by the Council's vast resources. The Council had thousands of ships, heavily armed, and ready to strike. But what they didn't have was the one thing that made humanity different: the relentless drive to survive, to protect their own. They may not have been as powerful or advanced as the Council, but when humanity was backed into a corner, that was when they fought the hardest. The message from Earth Command was clear: we're not backing down. We'll show them what happens when you pick a fight with the wrong species. Across Earth's fleet, commanders, soldiers, and strategists were already mobilizing. But Sarah's mind was elsewhere. She wasn't worried about the strength of the Council's forces. She was more concerned about how the humans would respond. The Council had just made a massive mistake. They had underestimated humanity's ability to fight back. In the hours that followed, military leaders and politicians gathered in secret meetings on Earth to formulate a plan. The stakes were higher than anyone realized. It wasn't just about protecting Earth. It was about showing the galaxy what humanity was capable of. They had been pushed too far, and now they would show the galaxy that no one could trample on them. On the other side of the galaxy, the Galactic Council felt justified in their decision. The leaders of the Council sat in their towering, gleaming citadel, surrounded by representatives from various species. The decision had been made, and there was no turning back now. They believed the humans would crumble beneath their might, just like every other species that had dared to challenge them before. They couldn't have been more wrong. But at this moment, Sarah wasn't thinking about the Council. She was thinking about Earth, about the millions of people who would be affected by this war. She knew the risks were high, but she also knew that humanity had one major advantage. They had nothing to lose. Earth had survived countless hardships, from natural disasters to wars among themselves. They had fought through every challenge, and now they were being forced into a fight that would determine their future in the galaxy. As Sarah walked through the corridors of the Ark Horizon, she could hear the voices of her crew preparing for battle. They were all in this together. Everyone was ready. And Sarah knew that, no matter what the Council had in mind, humanity would never back down. Not now. Not ever. The countdown to war had begun. The next few days would be crucial. The fate of humanity, and their place in the galaxy, was now in the hands of every human who dared to fight back. But as the fleet began to mobilize, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the Council had made a serious mistake. They had just declared war on the wrong species. The consequences of this decision would be felt across the galaxy, and the Council would soon regret underestimating the strength of humanity. And so, the story began. As the first shock of the Galactic Council's declaration faded, a deep sense of urgency began to settle over Earth. Across the planet, every corner of human civilization was buzzing with activity. Governments scrambled to prepare for what was now an unavoidable war. Military leaders met with politicians, scientists, and engineers. Strategists gathered in war rooms, plotting out tactics to face a force far superior in numbers and technology. But there was something different about the humans' response. While other civilizations might have crumbled under the weight of such a threat, humanity was galvanized. For the first time in centuries, Earth's people were united in a way they had never been before. They had no choice but to face the storm that was coming. And every human knew it. Sarah Kingston, standing in front of the massive holographic map in the Arc Horizons Command Center, scanned the positions of Earth's forces. The fleet was still small compared to the Council's, but Sarah knew something the Council didn't. Humanity had always fought smarter, not harder. It wasn't about having the most ships or the strongest weapons. It was about the will to fight, the drive to survive. The Council had made a mistake in thinking that humanity was weak. They hadn't considered the human spirit, the fierce need to protect their home and each other. Commander Kingston, came the voice of Lieutenant Mark, a trusted officer who had been with Sarah for years. The fleet is almost ready, but we're still outnumbered. The Council has the firepower. We've got to be tactical. Sarah turned to face him, her eyes narrowing. We'll need to strike before they can organize. We've already sent word to the colonies. They're preparing their defenses, but we won't wait for backup. Earth is our priority. Mark nodded grimly, his face tense. What about the Phoenix? You know we can't risk losing it. It's our best chance for a surprise attack. The Phoenix was one of Earth's most powerful ships, a carrier built with advanced technology that was still a secret to most of the galaxy. It could carry an entire fleet of smaller ships, including human-made fighters, that would give them the edge they needed. However, Sarah knew the risks. If they lost the Phoenix, their chances of winning the war would diminish dramatically. I'll take that risk, Sarah said, determination in her voice. We can't afford to hesitate now. We need to strike hard, strike fast. If we wait, the Council will have time to prepare defenses. We do this my way, swift, precise, and relentless. Mark gave her a sharp salute, his eyes showing a mix of fear and admiration. Understood, Commander. I'll make sure the fleet is ready. As the officers left to carry out their orders, Sarah took a moment to collect her thoughts. The weight of what was about to unfold pressed down on her, but she knew there was no turning back. Earth's fleet had already begun to mobilize, and with every passing hour, they were getting closer to launching their first strike. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the Galactic Council was preparing for war as well. Their leadership had declared the conflict, and now they were bracing for the inevitable retaliation from Earth. High in the Council's central command center, a council of the most powerful and influential beings in the galaxy gathered around a circular table. Their faces were grave, their expressions stern. We've made the right call, said the Counselor of Varnoth, a towering alien from a distant planet. His voice was cold and steady. Humanity has always been a nuisance. Their rapid development is a threat. We can't allow them to continue unchecked. The other members of the Council nodded in agreement, their eyes focused on the holographic displays showing the positions of Earth's fleet and colonies. Do not underestimate them, cautioned Counselor Keter, a sleek, reptilian creature from the desert planet of Shelok. Humanity may be small in number, but they have always fought with a ferocity that has made them difficult to defeat. We must strike first, before they can make a move. Councillor Varnoth raised a hand, silencing the room. We are prepared for them. Our fleets are ready. They will fall like all the others before them. But despite the confident words, there was an undercurrent of doubt in the room. The humans had never been properly understood, and their ability to surprise had earned them a reputation that made some of the council members uneasy. The humans had always seemed insignificant, until they started to win. Back on Earth, Sarah stood in front of the map again, her fingers tracing the lines that separated Earth from the heart of the galaxy. It was a long road ahead, but Sarah knew something the Council didn't. They hadn't seen humanity at its best. They hadn't seen what happened when humans were pushed too far. "Commander," came a voice from behind her. It was Mark, holding up a tablet. "We've received a transmission from Earth Command. They're giving the go-ahead. The Phoenix is ready. It's time." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. It was time. The war for humanity's future was about to begin. "Let's show them what happens when you declare war on the wrong species," Sarah muttered, more to herself than anyone else. Then, turning to Mark, she said, "Prepare the fleet. We strike in 30 minutes." With those words, the wheels of war were set in motion, and the first chapter of humanity's greatest battle began. The seconds ticked down to the moment that would change everything. Sarah Kingston stood on the bridge of the Phoenix, her eyes scanning the vast expanse of space. The stars glittered like distant jewels, a peaceful reminder of what was at stake. Earth's future, the survival of her people, all depended on what happened in the next few hours. "Commander," Mark said, his voice calm but heavy with the tension of the situation, "we're ready. The fleet is aligned, and the first wave of fighters is prepped. We're set to make the jump." Sarah nodded, her fingers brushing over the control panel. She could feel the weight of her responsibility more than ever before. This wasn't just about Earth anymore. This was about proving that humanity, small in number but vast in heart, could defy all odds. "Make the jump," she ordered, her voice firm and steady. There was no turning back now. The Phoenix's engines roared to life, and in the blink of an eye, the ship and its fleet vanished into the vastness of hyperspace. The transition was smooth, but there was a charged silence aboard the ship. The crew knew this was the moment. It wasn't just a battle. It was humanity's declaration that they would never back down. As the fleet emerged from hyperspace, they found themselves at the edge of a sprawling enemy formation. Thousands of ships, sleek and menacing, floated in the void. Council vessels that outnumbered humanity's fleet by hundreds. But they were not prepared for what was coming. Sarah could see the massive ships, their dark silhouettes stark against the bright backdrop of distant stars, unaware that the human fleet had arrived. "Targeting systems locked on," Lieutenant Mark reported. "The Council ships don't know we're here yet. We have the advantage for now." "Good," Sarah replied, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the targets ahead. "Let's make them remember who they're dealing with. Activate all stealth systems and prepare for Phase 1. We'll hit them hard and fast." The Phoenix's massive cannons hummed to life, drawing power from the ship's core. The crew members worked in synchronized harmony, their fingers flying over controls, preparing the ship's systems for the first strike. Each human ship, from the Phoenix down to the smallest fighter, had one thing in common. It was built with precision, stealth, and the determination to win. The countdown began. 5 seconds, Mark said, watching the display screen with a sharp focus. Sarah stood tall, her gaze locked on the enemy fleet. There was no fear in her heart, only the adrenaline that came from knowing she was doing the right thing. "Now," she said, her voice unwavering. In an instant, the Phoenix's cannons fired, sending shockwaves through the void. Bright, blinding blasts of energy ripped through space, tearing apart the nearest Council ships. Explosions bloomed in the distance, painting the void with fiery light. The human fleet followed, firing wave after wave of precision-guided missiles that tore through the enemy's defenses. The Council ships were thrown into chaos. The attackers had come out of nowhere, small, seemingly insignificant ships that had appeared from the shadows. The humans had struck first, and now the Council was reeling from the unexpected aggression. "Direct hit on the lead ship," shouted one of the officers. "They're scrambling for a counterattack, but their defenses are failing." "Keep up the pressure," Sarah commanded. "We can't let them regroup. All fighters, engage." The smaller human ships started out, swarming the Council vessels like angry wasps. The Council's ships were large and imposing, but the humans had an advantage. They were faster, more maneuverable, and their pilots were trained to think on their feet. No matter how much firepower the Council brought to bear, it wasn't enough to match the ferocity and unpredictability of the human assault. But the Council wasn't going to go down easily. As the battle raged on, Sarah noticed something that made her pause for a split second. The enemy fleet had begun to form up into a defensive pattern. They were regrouping, preparing to retaliate in full force. And they had just begun to unleash their own weapons. The first wave of fire from the Council's ships came in the form of energy blasts, bright and fast, cutting through the space around the human fleet. Sarah's mind raced. She had anticipated this, but the sheer scale of the attack was overwhelming. The human fleet dodged and returned fire, but the Council's ships were closing in, determined to overwhelm them. "Shields holding," Mark yelled over the sound of alarms. "But they're pushing us back. We can't keep this up forever." "Don't back down." Sarah's voice was filled with determination. "We've been underestimated, and now we're going to make them regret it. We fight harder." The Phoenix turned, launching another volley of missiles that sliced through enemy ships. The battle was far from over, but Sarah could feel the tide shifting. The humans were fighting with everything they had. Every strike, every blast, was a message to the Council. Humanity would not be broken. Sarah glanced at the tactical map. The Council fleet was starting to crumble. The human attack had come so suddenly, so relentlessly, that it was throwing the Council off balance. They had underestimated humanity's ability to fight. And now, they were learning the hard way that humanity would never be a species to be underestimated. "Phase 1 is complete," Sarah said, her voice calm despite the chaos. "Prepare for Phase 2. We're just getting started." As the battle raged on, the humans fought on, relentless and determined, proving that no one, not even the most powerful of the Galactic Council, was prepared for the wrath of a species that had been underestimated for too long. The chaos of battle seemed endless. The black void of space, usually so serene, now echoed with the sounds of destruction. Explosions lit up the darkness as energy blasts and missiles flew in every direction. The human fleet, though outnumbered, had proven its worth. The enemy was not prepared for the speed and ferocity with which the humans fought. But Sarah Kingston, standing tall on the Phoenix's bridge, knew that the fight was far from over. The first wave had been successful, but the enemy fleet was far from defeated. The Council had regrouped, and now they were preparing a counteroffensive that could change everything. "Mark, how are we looking on ammunition?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "Missiles are holding steady, but the energy reserves are dropping quickly. If this keeps up, we won't have enough firepower for another full assault," Mark replied, his voice tight with worry. Sarah's mind raced. They were running out of time. The enemy wasn't going to wait for them to reload. The Council ships were beginning to form a defensive perimeter, and their firepower was more concentrated than before. It wouldn't be long before they had the upper hand. "Then we make our move now," Sarah said, determination filling her words. "All ships, focus fire on the lead enemy cruiser. Let's make sure they know we're not backing down." The Phoenix and the rest of the human fleet fired in unison, their missiles and energy blasts streaking toward the Council's lead ship. The Council vessel, a massive behemoth of metal and technology, fired back with everything it had. But it wasn't enough to stop the human assault. The first wave of blasts struck the ship's outer shields, causing them to flicker and weaken. A second wave followed, and the shields collapsed under the combined firepower. "Direct hit," shouted Lieutenant Mark. "We've breached their shields." The Phoenix unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, and the lead Council cruiser erupted in a fiery explosion. The shockwaves rippled through space, sending smaller ships spiraling out of control. The humans had struck a major blow, but there was no time to celebrate. The Council ships were starting to retaliate in full force. "Brace for impact," Sarah shouted as alarms blared across the bridge. A wave of enemy fire slammed into the human fleet, shaking the Phoenix to its core. The ship rocked violently, but Sarah held her ground. She could feel the tension in the air, the energy of the battle pulsing through every fiber of her being. "We've lost communication with the fighter wing," Mark reported, his voice strained. "They're scattered, and we're taking hits. Get them back online, now." Sarah barked. The last thing they needed was for their fighter pilots to be lost in the chaos. Every ship, every pilot, counted in this fight. There was no room for mistakes. The battle was becoming a war of attrition. Both sides were exchanging blows, but the Council fleet had the advantage in terms of numbers. The human fleet was small, but each ship was a weapon of unmatched power. Still, Sarah knew that they were on the edge. If the battle dragged on much longer, their chances of victory would slip away. Then, an unexpected breakthrough. One of the smaller human ships, a stealth cruiser named the Revenant, executed a daring maneuver, darting behind a Council cruiser. The ship's weapons fired in quick succession, targeting the cruiser's weak spots, its engines, its weapons, and its communication systems. The Revenant struck hard and fast, taking out a key portion of the enemy fleet. The Council cruiser, now heavily damaged, erupted in a burst of fire and debris. The Revenant shot back into the shadows, disappearing before the Council fleet could retaliate. It was the kind of hit-and-run tactics that humanity had perfected. Every small victory chipped away at the Council's forces. "We're not done yet," Sarah declared, seeing a glimmer of hope in the shifting tide of the battle. "Now we hit them where it hurts. All ships target their weak points, engines, weapon systems, anything that will cripple their ability to fight back. We're not just trying to win. We're sending a message." The Phoenix fired again, its massive cannons lighting up the darkness. The Council ships retaliated, but they were slowing down. The human fleet had gained momentum. The first of the enemy ships began to retreat, breaking formation and pulling back to the safety of their larger fleet. Sarah knew it wouldn't be long before more followed suit. "Keep pushing," Sarah urged, watching as the enemy fleet's formations began to break apart. "We've got them on the run. Don't let up." The enemy ships were falling into disarray. The coordinated formations that had made them so powerful were now fractured. One by one, their ships were taking damage, retreating, or exploding in a blaze of fire and smoke. Sarah's eyes shone with the thrill of victory, but she didn't let herself get distracted. She knew the Council would be back with reinforcements. They wouldn't give up so easily. "Mark, prepare for Phase 3, Sarah said, her voice calm but fierce. "We're not leaving until we've finished what we started." The human fleet pushed forward, relentless and unyielding. The war was just beginning, but for the first time, Sarah felt a sense of hope. Humanity had faced the impossible, and against all odds, they were standing their ground. The tide had turned, but the real fight was yet to come. The battle raged on, and the human fleet had become a force to be reckoned with. Despite being vastly outnumbered, they fought with unmatched tenacity, refusing to back down. Sarah Kingston stood at the helm of the Phoenix, eyes scanning the battlefield with focused intensity. The initial wave had been a success, but they were far from safe. The Council was regrouping, and reinforcements were on their way. "Sarah, we've got incoming ships," Mark called out from his station. "They're fast, and they're coming in hot. We won't be able to outrun them." "Not outrun them, Mark," Sarah said, her voice steady. "We're going to face them head-on." She knew what she had to do. The Council had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, to think on the fly, and to never give up. The fleet might have been small, but every ship, every crew member was determined to prove their worth. And if it meant facing the Council's reinforcements head-on, so be it. "We need to disrupt their formation," Sarah ordered. "Target their command ship. If we can take that out, we break their coordination. The rest will fall apart." The crew worked swiftly, targeting the nearest enemy command ship, a massive vessel that had been directing the Council's forces. The Phoenix opened fire, sending barrage after barrage of energy blasts toward the ship's shields. The enemy retaliated, but Sarah didn't flinch. This was their moment. "Direct hit," Lieutenant Mark shouted as one of the blasts pierced the shields. The command ship staggered, its movements uncoordinated. The enemy ships began to falter, their once formidable formations collapsing under the assault. "Finish them off," Sarah commanded. The human fleet, seeing their opportunity, attacked with a renewed sense of purpose. The Council fleet's defense crumbled as the humans pressed forward, cutting through their forces with precision. But just as victory seemed within reach, a new threat emerged. A fleet of larger, more powerful ships, ships that had been hidden in the depths of space, arrived without warning. They were far beyond anything the humans had faced so far, with advanced weapons and impenetrable shields. The battle was about to escalate to a new level. "These aren't just reinforcements," Mark said, his voice tight with urgency. "These are the heavy hitters. We've got no chance unless we think fast." Sarah's heart raced. She could see the enemy ships approaching, their massive forms blocking out the stars. The Council was throwing everything they had left at them. If they didn't act quickly, this could be the end of the line for humanity. "All ships, form up around the Phoenix," Sarah commanded. "We're not giving up now. We've come too far." The human fleet rallied around the Phoenix, forming a protective ring as they prepared for the oncoming assault. The larger ships moved into position, their massive cannons charged and ready to fire. Every human ship braced for the worst, knowing that this was a fight for survival. "Focus on their engines," Sarah shouted. "If we can't take them down, we can at least slow them down." The Phoenix unleashed everything it had, firing a concentrated energy beam straight at the lead enemy ship. The beam slammed into the ship's hull, causing a massive explosion that sent shockwaves rippling through space. But the other ships closed in quickly, their weapons targeting the human fleet. The battle had become a desperate struggle, and the stakes had never been higher. Sarah's mind raced. The enemy ships were powerful, but they were also overconfident. They had underestimated humanity's ability to turn the tide, and now they were paying the price. The humans had a secret weapon: their willingness to adapt, to surprise, to fight when all seemed lost. "Mark, prep the Phoenix for evasive maneuvers," Sarah ordered, as the ship shook under the impact of enemy fire. "We need to buy some time for the rest of the fleet." The Phoenix dodged and weaved, narrowly avoiding deadly blasts as Sarah expertly maneuvered the ship through the chaos of battle. The enemy's precision was impressive, but the human crew's speed and unpredictability made them a difficult target. The human fleet wasn't backing down. They had lost ships, and many more were damaged, but they had one thing the enemy didn't: resolve. Each ship, each pilot, each crew member fought with the knowledge that their survival depended on every moment. Suddenly, another opportunity presented itself. One of the enemy ships, trying to track the Phoenix, had failed to account for the maneuverability of the smaller human ships. A nearby fighter swooped in from behind, targeting a weak point in the enemy ship's shield. The explosion that followed was deafening, and one of the heavy hitters was taken out of the fight. "Nice shot," Sarah shouted over the comms, as the rest of the fleet followed suit, targeting the remaining large ships. The enemy was on the defensive now, scrambling to regroup. The tide was turning once again, but Sarah knew this wasn't the end. This battle, This war was far from over. The Council had thought they could break humanity with sheer numbers and strength, but they had forgotten one crucial thing: the relentless spirit of the human race. Sarah looked out at the stars ahead, knowing the next phase of the battle was about to begin. They had just struck the first blow, but the war was far from finished. The humans had survived, and now they were ready to show the galaxy exactly what they were capable of. "Prepare for Phase 4, Sarah said, her voice calm but full of resolve. "We finish this once and for all." The battle continued to rage in the vastness of space, and the situation was growing more dire by the minute. The human fleet, though battered and bruised, was still alive. Their resolve had not wavered. Sarah Kingston stood at the helm of the Phoenix, her fingers gripping the controls as the stars outside blurred past them. Every fiber of her being was focused on the task ahead. They had to win this, no matter the cost. The larger enemy ships had been dealt with, but now the Council's flagship was closing in. This was the ultimate target. If they could take down the flagship, they would disrupt the entire enemy command structure, and the rest of the Council's forces would fall apart. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot they had left. "Mark, are we ready?" Sarah asked, her voice calm but with a sharp edge of determination. "We've got one chance," Mark replied, his voice tight with urgency. "If we don't hit it just right, we'll be wiped out before we can even get close." Sarah nodded. The plan was risky, but it was the only way they stood a chance. They had learned something crucial in the last few hours. The Council relied too heavily on their advanced technology and heavy firepower. They underestimated the humans' ability to think outside the box, to improvise in the heat of battle. And now, the humans would use that to their advantage. The Phoenix powered through the debris of the battle, weaving between wrecked ships and scattered asteroids, closing the distance between them and the Council flagship. The massive ship loomed ahead, its massive guns turning to face the incoming human ships. The crew knew the stakes. If they failed, it would mean the end. But they weren't about to let that happen. "Target the weak spot," Sarah ordered, her voice steady. "We've studied the flagship's design. There's a breach in the rear shields. That's where we hit." Mark quickly adjusted the ship's trajectory, locking onto the vulnerable point. The Phoenix began to accelerate, cutting through space with incredible speed. Enemy fire began to hammer the ship, but Sarah held steady, dodging as best as she could. The Phoenix was agile, and the humans had learned to use that agility to their advantage. "Shields are holding, but just barely," Mark called out. "If we take one more direct hit, we're done for." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She knew the risks, but there was no turning back now. The Phoenix surged forward, getting closer and closer to the flagship. The enemy ships were relentless, firing everything they had. But Sarah kept her focus, her hands moving with precision as she navigated through the storm of laser fire. "Almost there," Mark said. "We're in range." The countdown was on. The Phoenix was nearly at the right position. One shot, one moment. If they missed, they wouldn't get another chance. "Now," Sarah commanded. Mark unleashed everything they had. The Phoenix's weapon systems fired in unison, launching a barrage of concentrated energy blasts aimed directly at the weak point in the flagship's shield. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. The energy beams struck their target with pinpoint accuracy. The flagship's shields flared and cracked, the ship shuddering under the impact. But then something unexpected happened, an explosion from within the ship's core. The flagship's energy systems had been overtaxed by the bombardment, and the resulting detonation sent shockwaves rippling across space. The flagship began to falter, its movements slow and erratic. The human fleet saw their opportunity, attacking with renewed vigor. The once proud Council flagship was now nothing more than a hulking wreck, its systems failing one by one. "We did it," Mark shouted, disbelief and excitement in his voice. But Sarah knew this was not the end. The Council's forces were still formidable, and they were not going to give up so easily. The flagship's destruction had caused massive chaos within their ranks, but the enemy fleet was far from finished. "We've got to keep pushing," Sarah said, her voice steady. "Don't let up now." The human fleet moved in, capitalizing on the confusion. They had crippled the Council's leadership, but now they had to finish the job. Every ship, every pilot, fought with everything they had, knowing that the fate of humanity rested on this moment. Sarah's eyes flicked back to the stars, watching as the human ships tore through the remaining enemy forces. The tide had turned in their favor, but the war was far from over. There was still more to be done, more battles to be fought. The human fleet had proven itself, but Sarah knew that their greatest challenge still lay ahead. "We're not finished yet," Sarah muttered to herself, her gaze hardening. "This is only the beginning." The Phoenix surged forward again, ready for whatever the enemy had left. The war was far from over, but the humans had just taken the first step toward victory, and they would not stop until the Council was defeated once and for all. The once imposing Council fleet was now a shadow of its former self, shattered and disarrayed. Their flagship, the heart of their power, was nothing more than a drifting wreck, its once glorious form now barely recognizable. The human fleet, though battered and tired, was still standing strong. They had dealt a devastating blow, but Sarah knew that the fight wasn't over. The Council's reach extended far beyond this battle, and they would regroup, rebuild, and strike again if given the chance. The final moments of the battle were a chaotic blur of flashing lights, explosions, and the roar of engines. Every human ship was engaged in a furious struggle, taking advantage of the confusion to bring down their enemies one by one. The Phoenix, though damaged, still held strong. It was a symbol of the resolve and spirit of the humans who had defied the odds and turned the tide of battle. "Captain, we've got incoming." Mark's voice crackled through the comms, pulling Sarah from her thoughts. "More reinforcements. Looks like a second wave." Sarah's eyes narrowed. The Council was desperate. Despite their loss, they still had the resources to launch one last push. They couldn't afford to let this opportunity slip through their fingers. The Council was not a foe to be taken lightly. "Hold the line," Sarah commanded. "We finish this here and now." She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was the culmination of everything they had fought for. If they failed now, everything they had sacrificed would be for nothing. But Sarah was no stranger to pressure. She had been in the heat of battle before, and she wasn't about to let fear take over. The future of humanity rested on the outcome of this moment. The Phoenix surged forward, its engines roaring as it blasted through the void. The rest of the fleet followed, cutting through the wreckage of the fallen Council ships with deadly precision. The human ships were smaller, more agile, and better equipped to handle the chaos of battle. The Council had the firepower, but humanity had something far more important: their will to survive. The second wave of enemy ships came into view, their massive forms looming in the distance. There was no turning back now. Sarah's grip tightened on the controls, her pulse quickening as she prepared for the final confrontation. The Phoenix and its allies had to hit them hard, fast, and decisively. Full speed ahead. Sarah barked, "Let's show them what we're made of." The human ships closed the gap with astonishing speed, their weapons firing in unison. The enemy ships fired back, their massive guns lighting up the dark void of space. But the humans were relentless. They moved like a swarm of wasps, darting in and out of enemy fire, striking hard and fast before disappearing back into the chaos. In the midst of the battle, Sarah saw something unexpected, a flicker of hesitation in the enemy's movements. It was a small crack in the wall of their defense, but it was enough. The humans pressed harder, exploiting the weakness with ruthless precision. The enemy fleet began to falter, their once imposing formations breaking apart under the pressure. "Now's our chance," Mark shouted, his voice filled with urgency. The Phoenix lunged forward, targeting the largest enemy ship in the second wave. With one last, coordinated strike, the human fleet unleashed everything they had, their combined firepower overwhelming the Council ship. The massive vessel exploded in a brilliant flash, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. It was a defining moment. The enemy's morale plummeted. Their ships began to retreat, pulling back in disarray as they realized that the humans had just delivered a blow they could not recover from. "We've done it," Mark exclaimed, his voice a mix of exhaustion and triumph. But Sarah knew that it wasn't over. There would be more battles to fight, more threats to face. This victory had been hard-earned, but it was just one step in a much larger war. The Council might be broken for now, but they would never stop plotting, never stop scheming. And humanity had to be ready for whatever came next. "Stay alert," Sarah said, her voice steady and resolute. "We've won today, but the war is far from over. We will fight for our future. We will fight for humanity." As the Phoenix floated amidst the wreckage, Sarah took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought them here. They had faced impossible odds, and yet they had prevailed. They had shown the galaxy that humans would not be bullied, would not be defeated. And the universe had learned a valuable lesson. Never underestimate the strength, the resilience, and the sheer determination of humanity. With the Council in retreat and their fleet in tatters, the humans had proven that no matter how powerful an enemy might be, they would always rise to the challenge. Sarah Kingston and her crew knew this was only the beginning. But they were ready. They had shown the galaxy that humanity was a force to be reckoned with, and they would continue to fight, no matter what lay ahead.